Today in Roach Reflections I want to talk about dawn and dusk. These are two times when you can often catch big roach. There was a time when I would get up very early in the summer, talking 40 years ago now, and go up to Stour when Ringwood Angling Club had the fishing rights there, and I'd get up there about 5 o'clock in the morning in July, and I'd fish casters. The mist would be coming off the river and the big roach and chub would be feeding. Didn't catch any 2-pounders, about 1.5 pounds was as big as I'd got, but often I'd get 8 or 9 roach with 2 or 3 well over a pound, 1.6, 1.8, 1 or 2 good dace, and maybe anything from 1 to 4 chub, fish up to about 4 pounds, which were big ones back then, especially on the upper Stour. By about 8 o'clock the sun would be well up and the fish would just vanish. They seemed to disappear into the reeds and up deep under the tree roots. It was fantastic fishing, really. I really enjoyed it, and that sort of fishing is long gone. The fishing rights are no longer available there, and the big fish have disappeared. I won't say there are no good fish there, but nothing like it was. There weren't many swims, maybe half a dozen good ones. 1 or 2 of the swims you could catch laying on with casters, especially at the junction where the bit came down from De Western Mill, joined the other weir stream. And like I say, I was on my way by about 8:30 usually on a Saturday morning. This was before Blandford bypass was built, and by then Blandford would be absolutely gridlocked with holiday traffic. The only way round it to get back to Wareham was to head for the hills and go up through Winterbourne Stickland. Took about out in the sticks and find my way back through to Beer Regis and back home to Wareham. That was one of the few places I really fished at dawn. When Wareham Quay was very popular, would often get down there not long after 7:30 in the middle of the winter, and the roach would be rolling. We'd look off the bridge and you'd see the roach coming up from the bottom. You couldn't see them when they're near the bottom, but they certainly weren't just under the surface. They were coming up quite fast to the top, rolling and back down again. Whether they were taking a gasp of air to readjust their swim bladders, I don't know. I didn't often do very well early in the morning on Wareham Quay. Once or twice I caught a big roach first thing, but that was fairly rare. Often did much better later in the afternoon and into dusk. And over the years I've certainly fished far more at dusk than I have at dawn. What was noticeable a few years ago, 10 to 15 years ago on the Frome especially, was that fishing after work on some of the stretches around Wareham, that through the evening I would catch 1 or 2 roach, maybe a few more, and plenty of dace. But that last half an hour, as it got too dark to see the float, the roach would really feed, and I often caught quite a lot. And once or twice I was fishing blind pretty well. I'd cast out, pay out line, and sort of, can I see the float? Can't I see the float? Is it really there? Don't think I can see it. Strike, and there'll be a fish on the end. And even once or twice I'd fish in a stick float. I could feel the line tightening up as the fish took the bait. Even though I was float fishing, they're sort of pulling back. Rarely saw the fish topping or rolling at dusk. Seemed to be much more of a morning thing. Sometime back in the mid-80s, Wimborne used to fish their annual Christmas match, which was a big match by club match standards, 60 pegs. And they'd fish it on what's known as Baileys and Purchases flights. That stretch, both banks, all the way from where the railway embankment is, what is now by Dreamboats, all the way down to Camford School Boathouse. So about 30 pegs on each bank. And you'd certainly struggle to get that many pegs in now, because a lot of the pegs that we fish then are totally overgrown. There's plenty of fishable ones, but certainly wouldn't get 60 pegs in there. And quite often this match, although it was 60 pegs, was won with surprisingly low weights. I can remember scratching out £3 of bleak one day by the island and coming second to someone who had £5, including a big roach. Anyway, this particular year, the river had been fishing very well for roach, and I decided to go out early, sort of not long after 7, to see if I could find the people pegging out the match, which would have been Jimmy Finch and one or two others. And I walked up from the Camford School boathouse in the sort of semi-darkness. About the only sound was blackbirds singing or doing their alarm calls, and it was still. There was no wind. Very, very gloomy, hardly any light, just about enough light to walk in. Very mild. The river was in perfect trim, and I got to the Roach Bay, as we called it, down below the bypass there. And that's where the roach were rolling. Didn't see a huge number. I didn't stay very long, but I looked at it and I thought, that's where you want to be. That's where the big roach are. Now, the chance of drawing one of those 2 or 3 pegs out of 60 are not that good, but that was very promising. And eventually I caught up with Jim and the other peggers a long way up the river. They started earlier than I thought. Come the draw, I drew one of the pegs right on that Roach Bay. And there was a fellow on the upstream peg, which was also a good roach swim. And I said to him, I think this is going to be good today. We're right, drawn really well. They're going to take the bread. The conditions are perfect. He said, oh no, maggots. I fished it yesterday. It was really tough going. I found that hard to believe, but there you go. And I put some ground bait out in the middle, or just shy of the middle, and I started to get some roach. And it's one of the very few matches I've ever had a £2 roach, another one of £1.50. Fed a closer line, had quite a few dace from that, about 20 or so decent dace, and I ended up with £11, which was enough to win fairly easily. Like I say, the weights were often surprisingly low despite the plentiful fish through there. And the angler at the next peg above me, I don't know what he was doing, but he was fishing maggots and catching bleak, and he had about £1. And I never did figure out what part of the message he didn't get. But it was seeing those roach gave me so much extra confidence, seeing them rolling in the morning, because of course when we went up the bank at 9 o'clock after having drawn our pegs, there was no sign of fish topping at all, or very few, especially when you had the disturbance of 20 people walking up each bank, because it came in from different access points. Another example I can think of with Dusk was, again at Stour Pane, the bit that came down from the big weir that then joined the De Weston Millpool outflow. When the river was high in the middle of the winter, at that time they would open the sluices on De Weston Mill absolutely wide open, crank them right open. And as a result, the main big stepped weir there became bone dry. No, the water level, because the river was dropping fast, was below the level of the lip. There was a couple of pipes, little 4-inch pipes with water going through. So the only flow was the water coming in, the fairly warm water coming in from the River Yern, as in Yern Courtney and Yern Minster, which is a tiny little chalk stream that comes in right by the weir. Because the river level was really high below where the inflow came in from De Weston Mill, the river was backed up, so it had a very, very slow flow, fairly clear. And I went there just after Christmas one day, and I'd fished it before, fishing with a little waggler float. We're talking about a bit of river about 12 yards wide, not very wide. And I'd caught 1 or 2 roach on different days and the odd chub of about £1. But this day it was very gloomy, very mild, no wind, and slowly the roach started to feed as it got dark. We're talking about 3 or 4 days after Christmas, so It's almost the shortest day had only just passed, so it was pitch black by 4:30. And the roach started to feed properly around about 4 o'clock. Up to then I'd had about 4, and I ended up with 17, so I had 14 in that half an hour. And that day was memorable because it was the first time I'd hooked a 2-pounder in the Stour, which I lost. You have to take my word that it was a 2-pounder, but it was the one that got away. And the best roach I had there, as ever on Stour Pane, was 1/8. That seemed to be my limit on there. Never did beat that on Stour Pane. I beat it not far upstream, up on Hanford, with fish over 2 pounds, but not there. But it was just the fact that once that light really went and it was really dark, really struggling to see the float, those roach started to feed. The bites were very delicate. The little waggler was just tripping through very, very slowly. And it was a memorable day. It was memorable in another way, in that if I cast in, I was fishing bread punch on a 16. If I didn't get a bite and I could retrieve the float and the bait was still on, so it was really soggy, if I could drop it in ever so gently so the bait was still on there, but starting the swim very, very soggy in this very gentle current, then I often caught a roach, whereas the first time through I didn't get a roach. Something that's an interesting thing to remember with bread. If you can get it on the hook and as soggy as possible, then you've got a better chance of a bite when they're a bit fussy and shy. Hope I've got you thinking again. I've still got plenty more of roach reflections to do. Please click like and subscribe, gradually building up the subscribers. And cheerio for now.